Despite people evacuating the affected zones, animals stayed behind. And while these animals are highly radioactive, most of them saw their populations thrive. The animals that live in Chernobyl are the only occupants of the once thriving city and range from birds and eagles to wolves and bison. The radioactive Chernobyl animals do pose some threat to humans, however, and scientists are beginning to study them to truly understand how animals can adapt to living in a nuclear zone. In the radioactive red forest, fierce gray wolves reign. Following the disastrous fallout of the Chernobyl meltdown, trees temporarily took on a rather peculiar shade of crimson, and the region within the close proximity of the reactor received the moniker Red Forest. In the Red Forest, radioactive wolves are apex predators, with some studies suggesting their population is approximately 7 times higher than that of comparable sites. The animals have roamed far and wide, a problem is their carcasses are toxic to touch.
He can eat up to
The lynx, once thought to be non-existent in the area, thrives in Chernobyl. The Eurasian lynx is a cat once thought to have disappeared from Europe. But in 2014, scientists determined they made a comeback to Chernobyl. Like a lot of other creatures in the radioactive zone, this species of lynx thrived because there were no humans. Urbanization and hunters wiped out the species in the early 20th century in Western Europe, but they remained in parts of Siberia. Now, several hundred of these little creatures call Chernobyl home. Because they're very elusive and the zone itself is very dangerous, scientists haven't been able to determine how radioactive these creatures are. Researchers predict they have radiation levels similar to other animals. Swallows living in the red zone have deformed beaks. In the aftermath of the Chernobyl incident, it wasn't just the land animals who felt the effects of radiation. Birds have proven to be particularly affected by nuclear fallout. This is particularly true for the barn swallows around Chernobyl. In the early 2000s, the barn swallow population was observed to have several horrific mutations, including deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, partial albinism, and significantly smaller brains. Radioactive boars stalk the streets and wind up on people's plates as food. In the exclusion zone of Chernobyl and along the borders of outlying towns, radioactive boars intermingle with regular boars, being used for food. Occasionally, these radioactive boars interact with humans as foe or food, both of which pose serious threats. In 2017, it was confirmed that approximately 1 out of 3 boars slain in nearby Germany exhibited levels of radiation deemed completely unsafe for human consumption. This level of toxicity is spread as the boars continue to consume radioactive mushrooms in the fields. Radioactive eagles set up shop in abandoned watchtowers. Endangered white-tailed eagles are seemingly thriving in Ukraine. For the birds, this means being subject to varying deformities ranging from tumors to disproportionate beaks to decreased rates of fertility. Even still, the Chernobyl exclusion zone is said to contain 249 species of radioactive birds, with the mighty eagles making a serious comeback for the first time in over a century. On any given blustery winter day, beyond the limits and eyes of humanity, eagles build nests in abandoned watchtowers, adding an air of formidability to the atmosphere. Spiders weave radioactive webs all over the red forest. Radioactive particles have covered the red forest of Chernobyl for more than 3 decades, and new webs of radioactive material are being built all the time. As radioactive spiders build their webs to catch their prey, they add to the dangerous environment of the forest. These webs are not like normal spider webs. In fact, they are woven in abstract ways that suggest genetic mutation is at hand. They're also highly radioactive themselves, making them a danger for any radioactive cows are producing toxic milk. The area around Chernobyl was a bustling agricultural center before the meltdown. When people left, they took their farm animals too. But new generations born from these radioactive animals showed extreme genetic mutations and deformities. In 1989, farmers reported birth defects in their animals. One cow even had a mutated cleft lip. As the years wore on, cows continued to graze on contaminated feed and internally developed less physically apparent complications. Despite looking relatively normal, cows near the zone produce toxic milk not fit for consumption. Radioactive kittens come back feral, and with a vengeance. In the wake of the notorious Chernobyl event, pet cats were abandoned and eventually gave rise to a rash of feral descendants. Feral cats roam in and out of the exclusion zone, snacking on radioactive rodents and insects. Over 100 stray cats live in the exclusion zone, and efforts are underway for many of them to be adopted. The Belarus region contains radioactive bison. In a terrifying place where eagles soar, abandoned buildings collapse, and radioactive greenery sprouts up through the cracks of a forgotten countryside, the only competition for contaminated wolves is radioactive bison. These colossal beasts can weigh up to 2,200 pounds and they challenge predators with their size. Bison become irradiated by their food consumption even now as they reside in Chernobyl's notorious exclusion. Giant catfish. Fish live in the cooling pond of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. After the accident, the ecosystem of the reservoir received monstrous doses of radiation, especially the predators, catfish and pike. But today, radiation pollution has decreased naturally, and catfish grow up to 1.52 meters in length. Giant fish swim in anticipation of tourists and station workers who feed them bread.